Let us begin in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Dear Lord, we just thank you for this night. We thank you for the beauty of the spring day. We thank you for the chance to gather and to talk about some important things in our parish. Please be with us and help us to have a good conversation bounded by truth and charity. Come, Holy Spirit, come. Come, Holy Spirit, come. Come, Holy Spirit, come. Come and guide our minds. Come and guide our hearts. And we ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen. Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. St. Pius X. Pray for us. So there's basically three key points that we're going to be talking about tonight. The first two are pretty interconnected. The overall title is Paving the Way to a More Beautiful and Safe Future. And so the first 2 points are going to be parking lots and the Restoring All Things in Christ Foundation. And then we'll kind of stop for a minute, answer any questions, and have the discussion then before we head to the next thing, the settlement agreement, because they're very different. And as I mentioned before, as I mentioned over the course of the weekend, tonight we're covering totally different topics than what we covered at the town hall meetings 3 weeks ago. Now, when I presented this to the staff and to the Finance Council, this went for a long time, although that was the first that they got to hear about the settlement agreement stuff, and so you've at least heard that the initial shock is gone now for most of you, but there'll be, so there's not going to be any bombshells in what we talk about there, whereas that was kind of a bombshell when he got presented on Thursday. All right, so I guess the first question is why reconstruct the parking lots? Well, I guess if you walk through them, you may know the answer. But there's a couple of key things. First, appearance is important for us, for others who are thinking about joining our community. As was pointed out in one of the town hall meetings when I received a question about the parking lots, the first thing that people see when they arrive on campus is the parking lot. So if we're trying to make an hospitable and welcoming environment, the first impression isn't very good. And in fact, churches that are focused on hospitality often have a parking lot ministry, as we've done that at the Christmas and Easter Masses. And actually, Sean, could you get this bag of lights?
Sure.
Thank you. There we go. All right. Hopefully that helps. And so, 2 years ago, when a few months before the capital campaign, there was a meeting of all the a dozen parishes with distressed parking lots that Brian, our executive administrator, went to. And so Brian, as we're talking about the parking lot stuff, Brian has probably done 97% of the work. I'm just the spokesperson tonight. Brian has just done a fabulous amount of behind the scenes, and as this thing has gone in ways that we didn't expect it, he's just kept working and kept looking at different solutions to try to tackle the issue, and has a real passion for making this happen. So he went to this meeting of distressed parking lots, and of the 20-some parking lots that were there, those 2 lots were the bottom 2 of all of them. As you might guess, that one was the worst, and then this one was the second worst. The south wasn't as bad, but it's in any event. Second, we want people to be safe coming to our parish. And we can say whatever we want about, that's very important. And what we discovered, as we'll talk about along the way, is that a surprise was that the East Lot here doesn't meet the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act regulations for its slope. So that was one of the unforeseen things that as we went along. So put another way, reconstructing the parking lots is more than just about the functionality of parking lots, although it is. But it's about making our parish home a more safe, a more attractive, a more comfortable, a more inviting place for ourselves and for those who visit and our potential future members. So to walk through the history of this, so a lot of this was in my Bulletin article a couple weeks ago, so if you read that, I apologize for the repeat. And thank you for reading the Bulletin article. So when the Restoring All Things in Christ Foundation was launched, 2 years ago launched the Emerging into Springtime Capital Campaign, there were 2 purposes of the campaign. The first purpose was to pay down, and then eventually, as you were so generous with your pledges, to pay off the entire debt to the bank, and also to pay to the Archdiocese, to make repayment for the money that we borrowed from them during the last year and a half of the school before it closed. Second, to have a critical maintenance fund, and that one of the key items in that critical maintenance fund would be to reconstruct at least one of the parking lots. When we were looking at a $2 million goal, it was just going to be one, and we were hopeful that maybe we could squeeze 2 out of it once we got up to the 2.5, but we were also, when we went up to 2.5, then we were promising to pay down the whole debt. And the plan was that we would do the bus parking lot first, because it's in the worst shape. It's where the visitors most often go. It's where those who have limited, who are disabled or handicapped, that's where most all the spots are, closest to the church. And so, as part of Brian's due diligence, he met with the company that's kind of partners with the Archdiocese to help parishes in these things, and so the estimate was $225,000 for the west lot, to redo that lot. We knew that would be the most expensive because it's the one that's the poorest. It's poorest aligned as it currently is, not just because it's in the poor shape, but because of the way that it relates to the streets and all that stuff. The water just sits there, and so there's a fundamental, and so that we knew that it wasn't just going to be scraping off the old, it wasn't going to be just taking off the old pavement and putting a new concrete and blacktop, but there was going to have to be a fair amount of ground moved around to make that happen. The estimate was that between the 3 lots, it would be between $400,000 and $500,000. So then what happened? So in the spring of last year, through the financial support of the foundation, the safe engineering was retained after a bidding process, and they were retained to provide engineering services to design the new lots, and then to walk through the regulatory process that goes with them, which in itself is probably can be as complicated as designing the lots. And the goal was to reconstruct the west lot last summer. And at this point still, of June of last year, I thought the lot was going to be reconstructed last summer. But then at about this point in June, SAFE came back with us with the bad news. The news was that due to city, state, federal code changes since the lots were built, because realize some of these lots, are 60 years old, much more work than just taking out what was there, putting in new, and doing a little bit of recreating was going to be necessary. And that the cost, in fact, was going to be 2 to 3 times what we had originally expected. So why was that? Well, under the new codes, and so basically this first one is the big driver of it. Under the new codes, all the water that hits a hard surface, so basically all the water that hits the parking lot, all the water that hits the roof, and there's 75,000? 70,000 square feet of roofing in our complex, needs to be drained through a system that wouldn't overload the city storm sewer system in a 100-year rain event. So, certain roof drains, don't meet the codes. They spill water over the walkways. Once again, as I mentioned earlier, the east parking lot is too steep. And then the city also weighed in on various matters in terms of how they believe that the lot needs to be designed for beauty purposes and environmental purposes and stuff like that. So what we did was then, so Brian has been, with the help of the engineering firm, has been shepherding this process along. And so, it wasn't until April that we finally went through all the regulatory processes to get approval to do something. Once again, that's a long story. But you may have noticed the orange signs that were posted saying that there was going to be a public hearing. So we received a series of variances in order to be able to move forward with the project in a way that's somewhat reasonable. All right. So in mid-April, we put the project out for bid. So it was put out for bid. There were 15 different scenarios at different timings and different combinations of things. For basically the blacktop and concrete, for the lighting that goes with it, and then for the landscaping once it's done. And so we put out for 3 phases, and I'll talk about them in a minute. The first phase is the east lot. So the east lot is the one right outside this door, by the parish offices here. Phase 2 is the south lot, which kind of starts at the southern of the driveways off of Highland, and then wraps around to kind of the playground area behind the school. Then the west lot would then start at the further of the entrances and make its way to the front entrance. So the east lot, the bid was $329,900 to reconstruct, relight, and landscape that lot. Phase 2 is the south lot. The bid there was $659,900 to do the same. But there's a little bit more that gets done with that one. Because you know that thing I talked about at the start about we need to have a system that would allow for the 100-year rain event? But what that basically means is that we have to construct, and I'm sure there's a technical term for it, but what I call it a secondary sewer system. So you basically have to put in a sewer line from behind home plate where it would tie into the city sewer system all the way to the corner of Cedar and Highland, and all the way up Highland up to somewhere close to the marquee. And so basically there'd be a cement line that would go there. And then in left field, underneath left field, we have to put in a $250,000 piping system. So basically for the piping to go so the water would go back and forth to reduce the flow of the water so that it wouldn't overwhelm the sewer line. And so we had, we investigated, at one point someone thought that there might be some newer technology that could help us out on that, but then when we presented the calculations on that, we realized no, actually, this is the way it has to be done. So what that means is that even though the west lot itself is only $291,600, it's the cheapest of the 3 to do, you can't do it until that whole sewer line system is put in and that whole piping system is put in. So the west lot has to be done either in conjunction with phase 2, or I guess it could be behind phase 2, but because it's got to tap into the infrastructure that's downstream from it. So then there's also, timing always matters. So, so as we mentioned, a lot of work was done to shepherd, work on this through the city. And so the city approvals for the plan are valid through April of 2019. So if we don't start before then we need to be reapproved. Now hopefully we wouldn't have to redo everything, but you'd be placing yourself subject to the whole process again. So originally I had been thinking that this would be a next summer thing, but then there's good reasons for doing it now so that we don't find ourselves in further challenges. And second, last year when we realized that it no longer was going to be feasible to do something in the west lot, the foundation then decided to put $250,000 towards paying down the debt. And so that was the right decision at the time. It saved tens of thousands of dollars of interest. But as we'll see in a minute, it leaves the cash flow tight this summer to pay for the parking lot and the ongoing obligations of the foundation. So what is the plan? So subject to final approvals, there were a bunch of guys in yellow shirts here on Monday looking, the contractors looking at things. And so is July 9th still what they're looking at?
They were looking at just validating all the measurements of the lot.
Okay. So we're looking at an early July start to start the project. It's going to be 8 to 10 weeks. 8 to 10 weeks. We're also subject to final approval, going to be establishing with Premier Bank, which is our parish bank, a line of credit to make sure that there's enough money available to make the necessary payments. Now, as I'll talk about, hopefully we won't have to tap into that, but it's there in case that would be necessary. So that's the parking lot. And before we go closely combined, because kind of closely integrated with that, we'll talk about the Restoring All Things in Christ Foundation, and then once again I'll open it up to questions. So here's an update on the foundation. So first of all, Nan Steger from the foundation. So the foundation board consists of myself and Nan and Joe Cashman. So I want to say thanks to Nan and to Joe for your service on the board. So the campaign that we launched 2 years ago, there are the pledges were for just shy of $2.5 million, $2.496 and change million dollars. Thus far, thanks to your generosity, through June 1st, we received 1.16 million of that. And so that's 46.5% of the total pledged. We're about just under 40% of the way through the campaign, the 5-year campaign. So we're a bit ahead of schedule. When the campaign started, our bank debt was sitting at 1.4 million, and now it's sitting at 883,000. So what have we done with the money? So here's a pie chart that shows it. So this $460,488. So this is principal that we paid off on the parish debt. The $88,000 is interest that we paid off on the parish debt. So once again, it shows how important it is to get rid of the debt. Just over $60,600 has been paid back to the Archdiocese. As part of the campaign, we had promised to pay back $150,000 over the 5 years, $30,000 a year, and there's different kinds of debt that we owe them, and so this is basically we took care of 2 different kinds of debt, which is why we're at that strange number rather than 60,000. But that way, those 2 categories are completely done. So right now at the bank, we have $266,700. So that's money that's then available to go towards the parking lot, but it also goes towards the monthly mortgage payments and any critical maintenance that comes along. We have spent already $65,000 just to get the parking lot through all the parking lot stuff, the engineering and the regulatory process. We spent $103,000, almost $104,000 on critical maintenance. So the biggest one was redoing the roof over the confessional, but there's been a number of boiler issues and I think there's been a number of relatively small but still very crucial fixes that need to be done to the boiler system and stuff like that. And at this point, our administrative expenses are about 11%, but a lot of that was the upfront money. So that then will be coming down as a percentage as more things go forward. So what does this mean for the next 3 years? Well, we've run some. So Catherine, our administrative assistant, ran some kind of cash flow studies, and so if the foundation receives the 2.5 million that has been pledged, we'll be able to pay off the bank debt. We'll be able to repay the Archdiocese as promised. We'll be able to reconstruct and beautify the east parking lot. We'll have $75,000 in critical maintenance that we can do between now and July of 2021, paid by the foundation. But the downside is that there's not enough money to address the phase 2 or the phase 3 of the parking lot in the capital campaign. Now, if someone were to write us a check for $1 million, we would be very happy to get that. To get that taken care of.
We'll be accepting donations.
But that's where things stand. So, I mentioned that, that it's going to be tight. That right now we have $266,000 in the bank account. It's going to be $330 for the parking lot. We're going to have mortgage payments, and we're going to have maintenance to do, minimum maintenance hopefully, to do over the summer. So as I've kind of loosely run the numbers, if we get $125,000 in contributions to the foundation, so that's basically people, pledges have been made, but fulfilling the pledges, we will hopefully be able to avoid tapping into the line of credit. If we do have to draw upon the line of credit, there'll be a 4.75% interest rate on what we borrow, so that ultimately means 4.7% less that we can do in the long term of the great things that are done here at St. Pius. So I give an invitation, but also a caution. So the invitation is that those who made annual pledges to the foundation, the annual reminder should be coming out in the next month, and so this would be a great time to fulfill that. If it would be an excellent time as well to accelerate payments. The economy is in a better place than it was 2 years ago, and if you're able to pay more of your pledge off sooner, that could be helpful to helping things go forward. If you made a one-time gift and we're thinking about maybe doing something in the future, this could be a good time to make an additional gift. Or if you didn't make a gift, but now you realize that, okay, that we're doing what we promised, the debt is coming down quickly, the parking lot's going to be redone, this would be a good time to make a gift to the foundation. And in fact, if anybody's interested, we do have the pledge cards and the brochures from the campaign 2 years ago. But as I say this, there's a caution. The caution is that please don't sacrifice your normal offering to the parish operating fund to accelerate a donation to the foundation, because the basic costs of running the parish still continue, and if we end up, it doesn't do any good to avoid dipping into the line of credit to do the parking lots if we have to dip into line of credit to keep. So now to the settlement agreement. So once again, I guess probably most of you were at Mass this Sunday, and so some of what I'm about to say is probably you've already heard. But first of all, before we get into this, I want to thank you. I want to thank you for your faithfulness through this ugly time in our archdiocese. I want to acknowledge you for the suffering that you've endured as you've heard about all the things that have happened and that you've endured. That perhaps somebody here was abused themselves. Perhaps family or friends were abused. And certainly, the sorries aren't enough for situations like that. All of us, or most all of us, have suffered in some ways by being chastised by family and friends and co-workers for remaining Catholic throughout this time. Most of us in some way have had our faith shaken by our leaders and what they did and didn't do. And so once again, I just want to extend my apology for what you've been through, and as a result of the actions of my brothers in the priesthood and the bishops. And I just thank you for the way that we're here and we're moving forward. So how do we move forward? Well, ultimately, I think the path forward is the path that Jesus showed us. And that is the path of compassion and a desire to heal the wounded. It's the path of sacrificial love and encouragement. It's the path of seeking and receiving forgiveness. The path of making atonement for past sins. So most of you know the history, but we'll just quickly lay it out there. So the recent, the last few years that we've been through, in January 2015, the Archdiocese filed for bankruptcy due to the number of lawsuits. And there were about 440 lawsuits filed against it. And that was possible because the legislature and the governor changed the law to open the statute of limitations for a 3-year period so the churches could be sued for past abuse. So when the archdiocese went into bankruptcy, they, a bankruptcy judge was assigned to the case. And so up to 4 people per parish were allowed to be informed of what was happening. We all had to sign confidentiality agreements before we could get any sort of communication related to the bankruptcy. So at the time, that was John Chaplin and Kitty Anderson, and Brian and myself. Mindy stepped in very soon. There hadn't probably not all that much had happened before, so I'd forgotten that actually Kitty was here during the time when I first started, but Mindy has borne pretty much the full brunt of the last few years of it. And then Bob came on board in March, Bob York, and so we kind of got to help seal the deal. I'm just thankful for the number of hours and the ways that you've had to carry the cross, and under confidentiality, court-imposed confidentiality, to talk about these things, to deal with these things. So, once the bankruptcy was filed, we entered into the situation in a kind of a unique situation, in the sense that we had multiple claims filed against us as a parish. So there were lawsuits both against the archdiocese and against our parish. As was mentioned earlier, we owed the archdiocese a fair amount of money from the time when the last year and a half of the school. We also believe the archdiocese owed us some money. So they've, and we're talking about 6 figures in both directions. And then on top of that, we were a parish in a bankrupt archdiocese. So there were basically 4 reasons to have a lawyer. Slightly over half of the parishes in the archdiocese went with 1 lawyer. But we realized pretty soon that we weren't going, that given the various things that we had going, that we probably wouldn't be able to receive the attention that we needed. And so upon a recommendation, we hired Mark Halla, and so he's been representing about a dozen parishes through this process. And he's really, he's just done an excellent job. I think he's not only done an excellent job of representing us, but his presence has provided a good, without really getting into details, has been very helpful to the overall process. And so I think we've been really blessed by who we've had. And so once again, as I mentioned, a lot of time has been invested in this by the trustees, by Brian and me. And so I'm going to share with you tonight what I can share with you. And you can ask questions, but I suspect that a lot of them will be that I can't answer any more than what I'm sharing. Because I basically asked our lawyers, how transparent can I be? And I'm going to push it to the limit of what I can be transparent about. But there still is the court-imposed confidentiality. So it was announced on May 31st that an outline of a settlement was agreed to by the key parties. So the key parties in this are the lawyers representing the survivors of abuse, the archdiocese itself, the insurance companies, so insurance companies that represented the archdiocese, as well as insurance companies that represented the parish during the times that things happened, and the parishes themselves. Now the hope is that, so right now we have basically the framework of a deal. The hope is that that'll be fleshed out over the coming month. And then it's something that can be submitted actually to the bankruptcy judge. And then once it gets to the bankruptcy judge, there's the processes of the bankruptcy court. And so, probably September is the earliest that it could go through all of those processes. It might even be later than that. And the hope is that by the end of the year, the money will be paid in, and the survivors will start to be able to receive the money. So what's the fundamental deal? So a trust fund is going to be established of just over $210 million. And about $170 million of that is coming from the insurance companies of the archdiocese and the insurance companies of the parishes. About $40 million of that will come from the archdiocese and from parishes who agreed to donate money in various ways. And in return, there'll be no more lawsuits ever against the archdiocese or parishes for past abuse events. That basically, as the way that the bankruptcy laws work, even if the even if the state government were to repeal the statute of limitations again, the bankruptcy court action would take precedent over that. So, so basically this will be the laying to rest of things that have happened in the past. Now, of course, if something happens in the future, then, that's a new case and a new situation. But this basically was a speak now or forever hold your peace, and that was how it was advertised during those 3 years, and that really would be the case under this agreement. So what happens to the money? So once, assuming that the deal goes through, and assuming that the bankruptcy judge approves it, the money would be given to a trust fund. Some of it, of course, will be taken out along the way by the lawyers. And then a trustee not chosen by the archdiocese, so somebody independent will then oversee the remaining funds. And so there'll be some sort of a process then that the trustee will have to figure out for how the 440 survivors will receive an allotment of the funds. Now, presumably that will be based upon some severity of what happens, but that's not part of what the deal is. What's involved is giving the money to a trustee who presumably will be, a fair arbiter, and then figuring out how the money gets distributed between the victims. So, how does this impact St. Pius? Well, there were claims filed against St. Pius. The victim survivors filed lawsuits both against the archdiocese and their parish. And at this time, there's nothing more that I can share. As the process moves forward, I'll be as transparent as allowable. And so hopefully, with time, more details will be able to be shared. Although I would suspect that probably some of them never will be due to the confidentiality requirements and due to protecting people's privacy. So as I announced over the weekend, we'll be making a $36,545 contribution to the settlement fund. Although, as I mentioned, I guess these slides are written before the weekend, no funds will be used without donor consent. And the 36,000 is less than what it, had the process gone forward, had it gone to trial, and we would have spent far more on legal bills, even if we would have won the cases, than the settlement amount. One of the conditions, of the money that's coming from parishes is because people have an understanding of how much parishioners love lawyers, that, the money is supposed to go into the overall fund without the lawyers getting a cut of it. That was, and also, the archdiocese, we pay a certain amount of money to the archdiocese, and so these monies wouldn't count towards that calculation. And so basically, it's our parish's way to help bring closure to the tragic situation, at least the financial part of the closure, because we know that it's going to take a whole lot more than money, but that's part of what's entailed in it. So where will the money come from? And as I mentioned this weekend, the reason we picked $36,545 is because that's my salary. And so once the settlement agreement is finalized, I'll donate back to the parish all of my salary for the next fiscal year. And so that will, basically, I'm offering next year as an atonement for the harm done in the past by my predecessors. And so we'll figure out the exact payment schedule, but it'll be paid off fully by the end of the fiscal year. So it'll just be a one fiscal year situation. So why did I decide to take this step? Well, when I read the bankruptcy judge's order in December, so basically, the archdiocese had filed a plan to go forward, the victims had filed a plan to go forward, and the judge threw them both out. And so there was an order throwing them both out, and then there was an additional kind of roadmap of how to go forward. And it was quite profound spiritual reading for me. And so my takeaway from it is that I was spiritually convinced that as pastor, it was my responsibility to atone for the presumed horrible sins of those who served before me. People who presumably betrayed trust and violated people's innocence while doing so. Now, we had about 3 months to think about this from the time the order came out before I finally broached the topic. And so I consulted with my spiritual director, consulted with someone else who's helping me survive in the various challenges of being a pastor, and they were both actually, surprisingly, I wasn't expecting the support that I got from them, but they actually thought that this would be a good idea. But ultimately, as I talked to and a lot more about in the homily last weekend, it gets to the essence of the priesthood, and it gets to the essence of fatherhood more generally. That there's a sacrificial component to both, and that we as Catholic priests are priests, we're not ministers, because we understand that because the priesthood involves sacrifice by its nature, whereas a minister doesn't. A priest is someone who offers sacrifice, and Jesus is the high priest who offered himself fully, and this is how, as I talk about in the next slide, a priest is when he's ordained, makes promises to conform himself to Jesus. So as I talked about in the homily this weekend, the last promise before obedience at the ordination, the first promises are just simple I do's. The last one is I do with the help of God. And so the question is, do you resolve to be united more closely every day to Christ the high priest, who offered himself for us to the Father as a pure sacrifice, and with him to consecrate yourselves to God for the salvation of all? And I do with the help of God. And who is the priest to whom is the priest to be united? Jesus. And then there's a couple scripture quotes that I quoted in the homily as well about Jesus making the atonement for our sins. And every time I started to think, well, maybe I don't really need to do this, God kept me pointing me back to Moses, the story of Moses standing in the breach to save the people from punishment from their sins. And as I mentioned, throughout history, priests have had to give their lives, in the face of repressive governments. This is just 1 year salary, and I still get to live in a very nice home thanks to you all. So just to be completely clear, this was a voluntary step on my part. If there was any twisting of arms, in the other direction. And so then I pulled out Saint Ignatius of Antioch, who told the people of Rome, don't get in the way of doing what God is calling me to do, basically. And ironically, that was the office of readings for Sunday or Monday of this week. But as Dave Colling pointed out at the Finance Council last week, as a good graduate of the Catechetical Institute, so if you haven't gone to the Catechetical Institute yet, this applications are still available for the next 3 weeks for the coming year. He pointed out that we all share in the priesthood of the baptized, so we should all share in the financial pain and carrying the cross. And as I talked about in the homily once again, I do believe we all need to be in the priesthood of the baptized and share the cross, but the cross is much, much bigger than $36,000, and that serious sin has immense consequences, that there's much healing, much restoration that needs to be done in many ways. And ultimately, it's not just going to be through money, but it's going to be through sacrificial love in lots of different ways that we're going to be able to move forward from this. Sacrificial love, by praying, by giving hope to people and encouraging each other. So, my challenge to all of us is to live out the priesthood of the baptized, and to ask ourselves, how is God inviting me to sacrificially love others, especially those who have been wounded through the abuse crisis? And I laid out a series of possible ways to do that. One way, and I'm sure there's many, many more than this, but these were just, one is to reach out in love to someone in our family or a close friend who left the church because of the scandal. One way is to fast and pray. One way is, I think, something that we should all do, is we should all strive to be ever more merciful people. Another thing could be to volunteer at an organization who serves those who have been wounded. And it wouldn't even have to be through this. It could be, people have been wounded in lots of different ways, but how can we be instruments of healing through other organizations that bring healing? Financially supporting healing ministries. Having the courage to confront somebody who's harming somebody else. It doesn't have to be just, something as awful as this, but maybe people that we're seeing that are harming people, and to just sometimes it just takes someone to stand up and say stop. Sometimes they will stop, sometimes they won't, but at least have the courage to do that. And then, we'll be having the Healing the Whole Parish retreat the weekend of October 5th and 7th, and I invite you all to be here for that. So with that, I'll entertain questions. Yes?
Is the east lot, is that going to be enlarged at all, or be basically the same footprint?
It would be the same footprint.
Yeah. So the question is, will the east lot be the same size? The east lot will be basically the same footprint that it is now. Now there will be now some islands with trees in there, because that's part of what is part of the city's desire for a beautiful grounds, is that those are required by the city to have islands with trees in there.
Are some of the sidewalks involved in this?
Yeah. Are some of the sidewalks involved in this? And yes, basically all the concrete will go out with all the sidewalks will be replaced as part of it. Yes, Les.
Where are we with Liberty? Are they going to put in satellite school?
So the question is about Liberty. So I guess nothing's going to be happening this year.
The reason I ask is it would be a shame to have to dig up the parking lot to bring in more power to handle all. If we did have to do the power to come off the back side of the building, so that wouldn't be an issue. Okay. Because otherwise you could run conduit. Right. It won't affect, this parking lot won't affect any of the utilities that we have for that side of the building. And then the other thing is, are we going to be putting rain gardens?
Are we going to be putting any rain gardens?
No, we're going to be using in the backside, we're going to be using the drainage area in the back. We are going to put in an extended baffle to, again, allow water to move into the sewer system in the back, but we're going to use the back for where the water's going to go. And then one other thing. No, rather than going to the bank, could the church set up where people could invest money with the church to draw interest? And then a lot of people, I feel, would just let the interest be part of their donation at the end of it.
So
rather than pay the bank 4.79% interest, a lot of people would invest their money in that fund. That's really not something we investigated. One is just the reality of how fast we need to move. And then just the accountability function of the parishioners' money, and you understand how the money, the statements come out currently for the foundation. There would be a lot of administrative work to do that. So again, I don't know if that necessarily makes sense. We can move fast. With this particular situation, we've used the bank before, so we have a track record with them. He's capping that amount that he did with Father and I negotiated a flat 4% on the existing mortgage, so they've really been working very good with this, and I think it would be best right now to stay with the direction we're going. Good question.
So basically, Les proposed, could there be a way that parishioners could loan money to the parish instead of the bank loaning money to us? And that captured it. And so Brian was answering that question. Yes.
But it's my understanding, unless we tap into that money, we don't pay any interest. It's
Right.
just money there.
Right. Yes. Unless we tap into the line of credit, There'll be a closing charge, but we won't be paying anything beyond that, only if we tap into it. Yes?
With the interest rates rising, is the 4.75 fixed in our contract so that it doesn't change? I heard today that it's
Yes.
expected to go up a couple more times yet before year end.
Yes.
Yes. So the question is the 4.75 fixed on the line of credit? And Brian said yes. So we have, I mean, in part of the answer that Brian gave to us, when we did the campaign 2 years ago, we negotiated a fixed, because we had up until the campaign, we had a variable rate mortgage for the debt to the bank, and so we negotiated a 4% flat fixed rate in 2016 for the life of the mortgage. All right, Jean.
I have a two-part question.
Yes.
Probably a minor question, but if we're not going to handle the west, are we going to fill any of those holes at all? Are we going to put some blacktop so nobody dies falling?
So each year we have done some very basic pothole fixing,
Yeah.
and so I would anticipate that we would do basic pothole fixing, but to do something more extensive, like to take off the layer or something would probably be 6 figures for something that would last just a few years, because the base is bad and because the fundamental design of it is bad, and also we don't even know what the city would allow us to do, because we kind of went to the city and exposed what we have, and so we can't as quietly do things as you might maybe once could have, once you've shown all the problems that you have.
And also, can we do anything about landscaping up in the west lot? I mean, everything's also, in the park, when you come in the parking area where the trees are, and the weeds are overgrown. Can we, is there a volunteer gardening committee? I mean, I can't do it because my back
Right.
leaves.
But yeah, I guess you can talk to Brian about stuff like that. I mean, we do have a number of volunteers who do spend a lot of time on the property, right here, taking care of things. All right.
Was April 2019, is that time that you need to start or be completed?
The question is, do we need to start or be completed by April of 19 for the permits?
Needs to be completed by that time frame.
Completed.
That's why we're getting started now, to show good faith that we're moving in that direction.
Okay, other questions?
Well, they're gonna update this American Disabilities thing on that side?
Yes. So basically, it'll be completely reconstructed. So there'll be a fair amount of dirt that's hauled in.
Big ramps, automatic doors.
So kind of the way what you're gonna see is that all these steps are coming out because those aren't ADA approved also. So all the steps, all concrete. I've been doing the best job I can with the insurance company coming in and looking at the heaving of our walkways. And so I've been strategically repairing those in the line as we get inspected every year by the insurance company so that our insurance costs don't go up. So for the last 4 years, we've seen no increase. So all the walks are coming out. You have to build in the right structure for the garbage trucks because of the weight of the vehicles, so we're taking that in mind. The variances that I took care of, they wanted us to come in 40 feet off the street. We would lose all the parking spots all around the perimeter of the whole church. And so then we would have to take more green space. The parking lots and the ball fields would basically have to turn into parking lot. So that was one of the bigger issues that I went into with the engineer, with the city planners and saying that's just not acceptable, and we did win that case. So the other piece is, with the new codes, is ADA rules, the space for handicap spots has changed. The number of islands that we have to have, there's gonna be 3 here, and our snow removal guy's not real happy about it, but we're gonna have to put in 6 in the front 2 sections. And we've had to add a number of trees and bushes, over 300 bushes, 80 trees, to meet the codes of the city. So we've had to be very strategic in how we've met through this situation and some of the variances that we've received. So I think the end product you're going to be very happy with, and this is being taken care of again to follow most of the code issues that we have. Even some of the piping off the building, the large brass, we call them cow tongues, right by the handicap spot here, right by the doorway of the school. Water comes off that and it drains directly onto the walkway where the students and then the parishioners walk in, and that's just not acceptable in today's terms. So I have to redirect piping for that. So anyway, we're kind of cleaning up 60 years of change. And really nobody would have known to the extent of where the rules go and the measurements of how water moves off of the property. So anyway, you see a really good product. The company that we're choosing is Bituminous. They have a really good reputation. They've done a lot of parking lots for the Archdiocese. I've known them in my prior life. And, you know, we're not taking bad aggregate and putting it back in because we have to change the slope of that parking lot. We're going to bring in limestone, which costs a little bit more, but it's going to keep the integrity of that parking lot the way it needs to be. So we're going to take up and clean a lot of the safety issues from the insurance company, make it more functional, and achieve some of the needs that some of our officials need.
Brian, as long as you're up there, I'm curious about the requirements, especially on the south lot over there, and all the piping you're talking about, which I can kind of understand. You're going to be piping water, but I don't really understand it. Could you maybe go into number 1, who's requiring it? Is that the city? Is that the state? Is it requiring that piping not to go in the sewer? It sounds like the city is requiring the majority of this stuff. Am I correct with that?
Good question. The watershed district, state of Minnesota, and the city of White Bear all have their hands in that particular situation. The main thing is, you know, you've got a lot of water coming off this structure. And what it's doing, it's going across grass and then across sidewalks. When the kids are dropped off here at the school, water's coming across and icing up on the sidewalks. So we spend a lot of money and time putting salt down to keep the areas safe. We're going to have all that underground. It's going to be in a main system that's going to flow across, like Father said, from the statue straight across the parking lot, and then exit down basically the road. So everything ties in, gets into that piping system, which basically is the entire left field. It's 7 feet deep and rotates back and forth. That slows that water rate down before it gets to the main line. So we've gone back and tried to use the different systems, but because of the amount of water that's coming off this property, those other types of strategies just don't work. And so the unfortunate part of it is that's the only route we have.
How do they determine how much is running off of there, Brian?
Good question, and you'll have to talk to somebody much more smarter than me about that. There's an engineering calculation that's put together on that determines the rate of water and how it passes into the system.
I'm really miffed by it because that's mostly a green area, and I would think that would be ideal to capture most of that water. And yeah, when you have heavy rain, you're going to have runoff, but I can't think of what better you could put in there than having grass.
Well, but once it's done, Steve, I mean, left field will still be there. It'll just be that this thing is 7 feet underground.
Yeah.
It'll still be there.
I understand,
Okay,
it'll be
okay.
there, but my point is that you have to put this, I'm gonna call it an extravagant system. What is the cost of that system?
$250,000.
$250,000. That hasn't been there for, how many years have we been here? 60 years, whatever. We're putting $250,000 in because evidently we're overstressing a sewer system. I haven't heard a complaint from the city in 60 years, and all of a sudden, we got a problem. It doesn't make sense to me. And then what the city is requiring seems overburdensome to a small parish like us. I would love to hear and see what they are actually gaining from us spending $250,000, what that offset is. I would love for them to come here and tell us how we're bettering White Bear Lake. I don't think we are. I think it would be very minuscule in comparison to what we're paying out. And it's not, I'm not pointing this at you, Father, I'm not pointing this at you, I'm pointing at the city, because I think they're the main ones, and the watershed district. I would say that we're not probably gaining that much. I don't know if the system overflows or how often it does overflow, I have no idea. I haven't been aware of it, if it's happened.
Well, and as I mentioned, this is, the calculation is for a 1 in a 100-year flood, a rain event. So, it's not just your average rain, it's the, whatever they determine, a 1 in a 100-year rain in White Bear Lake is. All right, Patty.
So with all the beautification stuff, are we actually losing parking spaces?
No, we'll have,
We have to widen the 88, and then put in all those islands we're not losing?
Yeah, we're gonna reconstruct, we're actually, the question's talking about we're gonna lose parking spots. Actually, we're gonna gain spots because we're gonna take back that back corner. And the way we're gonna redirect all of the spots is we're gonna actually gain some at the end of the day. So we may lose a few in this side, but we'll gain more on the other side. And so net, we're gonna increase number of parking stalls.
Just one question, when you start tearing up the parking lot, how long will it be unusable, and where are all these people that park there when parking needs?
We got that taken care of. Father is charging $5 on the ground. It's kind of like the state fair. Man's offering up space. Where's Figured Eddie's got some space on those. We got that figured. It's going to take 8 to 10 weeks. How long, when we're going to reconstruct, we're going to lose that space, where are we going to park? And so it's a good question. I mean, good or bad news, we have to get it done before school starts because that's going to be a different set of issues. But what we want to do is, 8 weeks, hopefully 10 weeks at the most, depending on how the weather is we're just going to have to reuse the streets and, move around. I'm going to try to see if we can use the 34 stalls across the street.
Okay, my question is, because I know in the past, there's been neighbors around the church that haven't been parking on their streets on Sunday and whatever else, and have the neighbors been, are they been made aware that
Yes.
this is going to happen?
Yeah, that's the orange signs that Father talked about earlier, is to allow them to let them know that this was going to happen. So they've all had the opportunity to have a voice in that.
Question?
As far as putting in the big culverts and all that stuff in that road, the engineering company is not even considering putting in rain gardens. None at all.
Correct.
And why is that?
Cost. And they just don't see the same effect, they don't see the same benefit that this would be over the long time.
Because I called Mark Hirsch today from the city engineer, and I asked him about waters. It's a new building, 2 years old, they have rain gardens. And their roof in their parking lot is probably what we have here. Maybe ours is larger, some of them. But they were able to do rain gardens.
Right, and if you talk to the experts, So we've talked to a number of people.
Safe engineering.
Safe Engineering, we used Kitty Anderson's son, who's an engineer. You've got studies from all these companies that the rain garden is not the direction to go. It's not a long-term, cost-effective.
But you mentioned in the bulletin, it said that safe engineering was approved by the Archdiocese. I've got 210 million reasons why maybe we shouldn't use them.
They weren't. There was an interviewing process on engineering companies, so they weren't approved by the Archdiocese. We went and interviewed, Safe Engineering won the bid. They had no relationship with the Archdiocese.
Deb?
Is it safe to assume that in 3 to 5 years or some period of time, that if all this work is done, it doesn't matter if the school's here or not, because that'll be repurposed? Does this, all the construction have anything to do with the school or any other use of the facilities?
Does this have any? No. I mean, so the question is this at all tied to the use of the school? And no. I mean, the reality is as long as the building is standing, and as long as we need to use our parking lots, something needs to be done. Now, I guess, maybe if you were to demolish a school building, I don't know if that would that would reduce the roof space. But in terms of it's being driven by how much roofing we have, how many parking lots we have, and yeah.
May I say something?
Yes.
As an outsider,
Yes.
I'd like to at least, the commissioner should focus on the fact that this is not only the cost effectiveness, because water sits its own level, and all the things that I've been hearing is about the draining and all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
We have to make sure we are not only cost effective in the future of the 100 year ahead of us.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how many will be alive.
Probably not many of us will be alive in 100 years. Although hopefully we'll be alive in heaven.
But it's the safety of the majority of the demographics of the parishioners. Because from my observation, we have a lot of possible slip and fall and insurance claims, and we're trying to prevent that because we seniors, I'm 80 years old, but it is great to think about the seniors, not only the handicapped, not only we're talking ahead.
Right.
And having a vision that God has blessed us with this vision of being ahead of the 1 year.
Right. Yes, so we all of what you've described has been taken. We're aware of the risks and so that's will lower our insurance premiums. No. All right. Any other questions? Yes, Steve.
Could I just ask a clarifying question? So on the east lot here, is my understanding that other than the ADA slope of that lot, there's not a drainage quote-unquote issue?
Well, the drainage will be dealt with as part of the construction project, but it doesn't require putting in a whole.
It's pretty much there, is what I'm saying. The structure is there. It's just we're sloping it differently, and maybe we're going to open it up or something to flow in there. I don't know, but I'm just asking: is it essentially the same drainage system we have back there?
The only thing what'll change is the 4 downspouts on this side. Those will be underground, so they won't go across the grass and on the walk. And they'll feed into a main line that goes out to that the drainage area out there on the side. Everything else stays the same.
So you will have an underground drainage?
Correct.
Okay.
I wondered, with holding water, we have something in place that water can be used for watering rather than having, pay for the city water unless we ask for it.
We're going to help the fish over in this pond, this area.
Thanks, Father Joe. All right, well, thank you for your good questions, and I guess if there's, additional questions, Brian has done so much work on this, and so I'd invite you to talk to him about it.